Well, hi, everybody. My name is Agam Patel, and I'm the Associate Director here at UCR's Palm Desert Center, and it is my privilege to welcome all of you to the second of our four-part lecture series called Exploring Our Aging Brain. This is going to be an exciting lineup that you will not want to miss. And if you've missed the first lecture in this series, fear not, we've got you covered. Subscribe to UCR Palm Desert's YouTube page and catch up on all the informative lectures you may have missed. Maggie will put that up in our chat momentarily. But before we begin, I'd like to thank our Palm Desert partners who are instrumental, as always, in contributing towards programming like this. If you'd like to learn more about our partners program, we'll put up a link in the chat momentarily as well. I also want to thank the mighty UCR Palm Desert team, without which none of this would be possible. So thank you, one and all. All right, let's get started, shall we? This program is brought to you in collaboration with UCR's Aging Initiative. Moderating tonight's discussion will be Dr. Lonnie Bennett, an Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of California, Riverside, and co-director of UCR Aging Initiative. She received her bachelor's degree in cognitive science from the University of California, Irvine, a PhD in lifespan cognitive neuroscience from Georgetown University, and completed postdoctoral research at the University of Texas at Dallas and the University of California, Irvine. Her research seeks to advance our understanding of the way we acquire, retain, and retrieve information. She is particularly interested in how these learning and memory processes are affected in aging, and studies their neural substrates using magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. Her research has attracted funding from the National Institute on Aging at every stage of her career. So, welcome, Lonnie.
Thank you so much, Agam. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I just want to start by saying a couple of words about the UCR Aging Initiative, which, as you mentioned, sponsors the events for tonight, at least in part. So the University of California, Riverside Aging Initiative is seeking to create a world-class institute on healthy aging at the UC Riverside campus. We envision this being a center of research, education, as well as a hub for our community. And the grand vision is that we would have this very uniquely integrative program that looks at aging across multiple levels of study, from molecules to individuals to society. Where the ultimate goal of all the researchers involved in the initiative is really to understand the integral role of human diversity in aging. Our founding director is joining us here tonight. That's Dr. Erin Seitz. I now co-direct the initiative with Dr. Marcus Call. And I should mention, though, that the initiative involves over 60 faculty and staff across all 7 colleges of the UCR campus. So we're really excited about the series that we have put on for you. As Agam mentioned, this is the second of 4 presentations exploring our aging brain. Tonight's session is titled, "Can we train our brain to improve cognition and well-being as we age?" And we have 2 presenters tonight, both faculty from the Department of Psychology at UC Riverside. For the structure tonight, what I'll do is introduce our first speaker, Dr. Rachel Wu, and have her give her presentation. I will then introduce our second speaker, Dr. Sonia Loubierski. She will then give her presentation. And at the very end, we will have a question and answer session, and the 2 of them will be happy to answer any questions that you have. If you have questions that come up during their talk, please add those to the Q&A feed at the bottom. I think we're ready to get started. So I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker. As I mentioned, Dr. Rachel Wu is an associate professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside. She completed her PhD in psychology at Birkbeck University of London. And her research investigates how we attend to and learn relevant information across the lifespan. Dr. Wu has received a Rising Star Award from the Association for Psychological Sciences, as well as funding from the National Science Foundation, a prestigious career award that allows her to investigate the role of learning new skills on cognitive and functional growth in older adulthood. And tonight we'll hear about her work examining learning new skills as an important privilege across the lifespan.
Great, thank you so much, Lonnie. Can everybody see my screen? I assume you can see my screen, so I'm just gonna go ahead. So today's talk that I'll be focusing on will be on how learning new skills across the lifespan, but especially in older adulthood, is an important privilege. And I hope by the end of the talk, I will have convinced you that it is an important privilege. First, I'll talk about how it's important, and then I'll talk about how it's a privilege. So first, let me bring up the chat window here. So first, I want to get a sense of what you think about this. So imagine this is Nicholas. And so Nicholas is 74 years old. How critical do you think it is for him to be learning new skills? So critical, so on a scale from 1 to 10. So 10 being absolutely critical for survival, and then 1 being not critical at all. So just type in your response there for how critical you think it is for Nicholas to be learning new skills. So I'm seeing a lot of 7, 8, 9, 10s, a lot of 10s. So when I normally give this talk to not people I would be preaching to the choir to, I often get the response of like 4 or 5, somewhere in the yellow range, right? Something that's not so critical. I'm going to try to convince you that learning new skills, especially in older adulthood, is more around the 8, 9, 10 range, unless you're relying on other people to do stuff for you. So if you think about whether it's critical for Nicholas at age 74 to be learning new stuff, what about this Nicholas who is age 3? How critical is it for him to be learning new things? And on a scale from 1 to 10. And so most people, right, would be saying 10, right? And the disconnect is that a lot of people would say that 74-year-old Nicholas would be somewhere in the yellow range, 4 to 7, but a 3-year-old absolutely a 10. Whereas our theory is that across the lifespan, no matter how old you are, it's very critical to be learning new skills. So yeah, and of course, some of the new skills you have to learn are some of the ones you've forgotten as well. So you might have to relearn stuff or unlearn some things and learn other things. So we know it's very important for infants and children to learn. That's why we have caregivers, we have teachers, we have schools, we have laws to force kids to be in school. So the importance of lifelong learning, we also know as well, right, with adults and especially in older adulthood. And so you could be learning from your grandkids, you could be learning from your adult children or younger generations and also your peers. But there isn't as much of a set structure except for some kind of community programs and things like that. But there isn't like set structures like schools and things as much compared to younger populations. But we do know the importance of lifelong learning, and pretty much everybody has heard of maintaining cognitive abilities, use it or lose it, that kind of thing. So now I'm going to take it one step further and convince you that it's absolutely necessary to be learning new skills as an older adult. The use it or lose it is it's kind of like you can learn if you want to, and then and if you don't learn, you might decline cognitively. But there's a much more important issue, which is beyond cognitive abilities, and that's how independent you are. So how many of you have been learning new skills during the pandemic, right? So you could have been maybe learning how to communicate with a lot of like telemedicine, telehealth things when it came kind of online during the pandemic. So the only way I could get a doctor's appointment was through a video chat, in one case, and I had to learn how to navigate their software and things like that. So new abilities had to, be acquired during the pandemic for, some kind of critical issues. Maybe you learned how to fix your own toilet too, because you couldn't get a plumber out or something like that. And you could have also learned new leisure activities too, like learning how to crochet and things. So I just saw in the chat, somebody started a new career online. And yeah, so if you start a new, area of work, then that would be something that, that would be something new that you would be learning as well. So there's a range of things that are absolutely necessary for you to be learning. And then there's, on the other side, there are things that you could learn for fun because you want to, but not absolutely necessary. So in a changing environment, learning new skills is very important for maintaining independence. So this is beyond maintaining your cognitive abilities. This is your ability to be living independently in your own home and, in the community. So when you are, hang on, let me just close this chat. Sorry, it's a little distracting. Okay, when you are learning as an adult, there are specific aspects of the adult learning environment that that makes it a little bit harder to learn. So one is that when you want to learn something, you have little access to live instructors, people that can teach you in person. A lot of it is self-directed learning during adulthood. And you're more often than not within your comfort zone. So you're learning things that you kind of already have some kind of foundation for knowing how to do. And it could be more incremental rather than broad learning. So if you're, if you know how to play, the piano, maybe you learn how to play, the keyboard or something like that. It could be, also if you know how to play the violin, then you're, playing the cello or, something that's like within your comfort zone, right? But not completely outside of your comfort zone. So learning how to surf or learning, tennis or something when you have, no prior sports activity or something like that. And a lot of adults have a very fixed mindset as well. This is probably not you guys, but there might be the mindset of, I've never been good at sports. I've never been good at learning languages. So why start now? And so I don't have the gene, to draw or something. And so that kind of mindset can keep adults from learning new things as well. And there's also a very unforgiving environment where adults are not allowed to make mistakes, and they're more often than not afraid of failure, because the more you're making mistakes and failing, the more you might appear senile or something that would feed into a stereotype, an ageist stereotype. And if there is learning, it's not always a very serious commitment to learning. It could be learning hobbies and, learning something for a couple months and then dropping it, as opposed to learning something for a career, which someone had just mentioned. So that's a lot of times the switching careers at age 69 or something is more rare than, picking up something as a hobby when you get older. And then if people are learning things as an adult, usually it's, maybe one skill at a time as opposed to multiple skills at a time. So AARP came out with a survey recently that basically indicated that people over 40, the people in their survey over 40, about half of them didn't learn new information on a weekly basis. And this is kind of troubling because the next item on the survey was how many people Google information, right? So this is like people that don't even Google for information on a weekly basis. So you might be surrounded by people who are learning a lot of new things and kind of, staying active and things like that. But there are many, many, many adults, especially older adults out there, who are not doing this. And so that's who we're trying to reach. So when infants and children are in this situation where there are not a lot of instructors and they're afraid to make mistakes, and they think they can't, they think they're not good at, learning and things like that. They're in a situation that we referred to as deprivation, right? And so what our theory is that on one end of the lifespan, you have something that's so terrible and we try to fix as soon as possible. And on the other end of the lifespan, where it's kind of normal for adults to not be learning a lot of things and to, have little access to teachers and things like that. So one additional point to kind of drive this home, when we refer to maintenance in childhood, it's really a last resort. So if you keep a kid in first grade, for example, even if, this kid could advance to second grade or third grade, that's holding the kid back, which is it's the last resort, right? Whereas when we talk about, development or something in older adulthood, we often talk about maintenance, which is like just keeping whatever you have. So what I'm trying to do is change the narrative and change the way we talk about aging to be more about growth and development as opposed to just maintaining what we've got. So our theory is that when you're learning a lot of new real world skills, ultimately what that ends up doing is helping you have long-term functional independence in an environment that's constantly changing. And how you get there is with these three pieces, which is learning what to learn and how to learn, and then having the motivation to do so, and then having the cognitive abilities for learning. So a lot of focus right now is just maintaining cognitive abilities, but I think a lot of there's kind of this missed opportunity to really focus on the fact that you can be independent in an environment that's changing. And so with this model, if you kind of think about it in terms of like a car analogy, the learning what to learn and how to learn is kind of like the GPS of a car. And then the motivation is like the fuel, and then cognitive abilities is the kind of engine of the car. So if you're training up your cognitive abilities, and let's say maintaining cognitive abilities or even increasing cognitive abilities, you'll have a great engine. But if you don't know what you're supposed to be learning or how to learn, or have no motivation to keep learning, you're not going to go very far, right? So that's the idea of all of these pieces needing to work together to then allow functional independence in the long term. So, and this is all assuming that there are also adequate resources in the environment, which not everybody has equal access to. So in our study, what we wanted to do was start testing this gigantic theory that we have, where you have the different pieces of everything, and that helps maintain long-term functional independence. The first piece of it was to show that people could actually learn a lot of new skills in older adulthood, because that wasn't something that people had believed before, at least not in the literature. And so what we did was we had older adults come in to learn 3 new skills at the same time. So they're essentially taking the undergraduate course load in some ways. And for 3 months, this first study, people learned painting, how to use an iPad, and Spanish. And we had a very small group, just 6 people, because we weren't sure how things would go, whether everybody would just quit or something. So once that was a successful study, then we ramped it up to about 30 people in the second round. So in the first study, we had 6 people in the intervention group, so people doing the 3 skills at the same time. And then we had 9 in a no contact control. So they basically just did the assessments and then didn't, I'll tell you what the assessments are in a bit, but they just did the assessments and didn't do the learning intervention. And then in study 2, we didn't have a control group. We just had the 27 people in the intervention, but they came in before the study, and then we had assessments before that so that we could compare them to that. And in the first study, they learned painting, Spanish, and how to use an iPad. And in the second study, there were more classes because we wanted to keep the class sizes small, so that so we assigned people based on what they didn't know how to do. It was about 10-ish people per class. So they were doing drawing, Spanish, photography, music composition, and also iPad. And the first study was 15 weeks, but including homework and the class hours. So the class hours were about 6 hours a week, and then there was an extra hour where we had a kind of motivation lecture, and kind of talking about barriers for successful aging and things like that. So it's about 15 hours a week, including homework, which is a lot of time because you're setting aside basically, most of your life for those 15 weeks. And so the feedback from that was that it was a little bit too long from the participants. And then we went to 12 weeks for study 2. But essentially it was about 3 months. And this is the weekly discussion on successful aging as well. So, and we picked these skills because they were all novel to the participants. They were difficult. So that allowed for potential for increasing levels of depth and challenge. And also it would require learning from somebody and maybe taking years to master. And there were also real world skills. So they're more easily translatable to other real world tasks. And then also the social component was really important too. So learning in classes or with a teacher and, seeing other students struggling, and then you can learn from other students who maybe had successes and everybody was holding each other accountable. So here are just some examples of from painting class. So this was week 1, people who had zero experience painting or drawing before. And they just got better over time. And so a lot of them were very shocked at how much better they got over time with a good teacher and with, the time set aside to improve a particular skill. So what we ended up doing for the assessments followed this kind of timeline. So we had week 0, midpoint, which is week 7, and then week 15 for this first study. And then we did a 3-month, 6-month, and 12-month follow-up. And then for the study 2, we had this extra baseline period before the intervention started at the pretest week 0. And then we also did the same follow-up studies with them. The assessments that we did, we did a bunch of assessments, but the thing that I will present here will be on their cognitive abilities. And so in particular, we focused on working memory and cognitive control, which are working memory is basically your ability to keep something in mind for a very short amount of time. So in the first task, they had to remember the number of green dots or the number of blue dots, and then just kind of hold that in memory over several trials. And then the second one, they had to remember the location of a square and like digits in between as well. And then for cognitive control, they had to they had to match basically a shape or color on a particular trial. And that's basically to assess how you're able to filter out, information, control your attention and things like that. And so the other task is pressing, right or left for an arrow if the competing information is agreeing or not agreeing with it. And so when you combine all of these 4 tasks into a score, it's a bit more kind of understandable in terms of what it means. So the y-axis here is the composite score of those 4 tasks, and then the x-axis here is the different time points. So the intervention started at pre-test, and then there's midpoint, post-test, 3, 6, and 12-month follow-ups, and then baseline is 4 to 6 weeks before the start of the intervention, and this was only there for study 2. So study 1, the intervention group is the blue line here, and they increased a bit from pre-test to post-test, and as did study 2. And so the control group, the 9 people in the control group for study 1, they just did the cognitive assessments and didn't come in to do any of the learning tasks. And there was not as much of an increase over time. So just doing the same tests over and over again, if you, get practice doing that does not help you very much in these assessments. And so what happened after that, we followed up the orange and the blue line groups over the 1 year period, and they continued increasing, which was really awesome. And so you see these numbers and you're like, okay, so what does that mean? What does a 0.8 mean versus a 0.2 or something? So if you take a bunch of people around the age of 72 on average, so 60 to 80-ish, that's kind of where people would land if they came in to do the assessments, the cognitive assessment. And if you take a bunch of undergraduates, so 18 to 22 years of age, that's kind of where they would land. And if you, we got a bunch of middle-aged adults as well to come in, and that's where they landed. So there's a big gap here between middle-age and older adulthood, and as a smaller gap between younger adulthood and middle-aged adults. And so we were basically able to bridge this gap over just a 1 year period. And a lot of it was after the intervention had started, or sorry, after the intervention had stopped. So, so that's what we have been working on. And we're, these are very small samples and, just, a few dozen people. So what we have been trying to do is run a much larger study, a bigger, better version. And we had started the first group of people, but then COVID shut us down. And so we have had to kind of regroup and figure out what to do. So we wanted to see if, learning, like, do you really have to be spending 15 hours a week to learn to get these improvements? Or can you just do like 2 hours a week or 6 hours a week? Or do you have to be learning 3 skills, or can you do 1 skill? And so kind of the dosage question. But because COVID shut us down, then we've been trying to figure out the people who have been in the intervention with us before, how well have they been doing during the intervention or during the pandemic, because they've been trying to adapt to all the changes that we, had kind of tried to prepare them for. So throughout the whole study, we were like, there will be changes happening. You have to be learning to be functionally independent, blah, blah, blah. And so then boom, everything changes the next day because everything, gets shut down. And how have they been doing? So it turns out that learning new skills may have helped older adults adapt better to the pandemic, but that may have decreased their well-being in the short term, because learning new skills is hard and it's very challenging. And so in the short term, they might not have been as happy as older adults who had not been learning new skills. So that's something we're following up on and quite interested in. So hopefully I've convinced you that it's important to be learning new skills due to functional independence and also cognitive development throughout the lifespan. But it's also a privilege because you need a lot of time and effort and growth mindset and resources to be doing so. And so what we're trying to do now, what my lab is trying to do now, is increase access to learning opportunities across the lifespan. And one way of doing that is focusing on at-risk populations where they don't have as many resources and things like that. So especially low-income minority older adults who have not as many resources. So this is a collaboration with the Riverside County. And so we're targeting at-risk individuals who may have cognitive decline or are at risk for cognitive decline, loneliness, and functional and health deficits. And we're trying to increase proficiency with technological devices so that they can access benefits and increase social connection with friends, family, and things like that. And we're taking components from the our learning theory and also for tailored instruction for them. And we're looking at how it might improve social connectedness, cognition, functional dependence, and things like that. So basically, we're trying to increase access to teachers and provide more resources for learning. But it's not something that just my lab can do. And it's something that we're hoping that will catch on and more policies and, just resources in general will be available for learning in older adulthood. And then for older adults, but for the rest of the society to provide a more kind of open-minded environment, and having more growth mindset, and be more forgiving of mistakes made, especially with age. And then having, hoping that people will have more serious commitments to learning when they are learning something. But I'm preaching to the choir here. And then if you are learning something, maybe learning more than one thing could also kind of enhance all of these other aspects. So with that, I just want to say thanks to my lab and collaborators and all the funders.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was fantastic to hear about your work. I appreciate everyone who is posting their questions in the Q&A. What we'll do now is move on to our second speaker, and then I will bring us back. For those of you who have asked questions in the Q&A, I will have Rachel address them at the very end for our discussion. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to our second speaker, Dr. Sonia Loubierski. She's a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside, and she received her bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, from Harvard University, and then her PhD in social psychology from Stanford University. Her research examines the science of happiness, and you might have seen her books, The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness, which are now published in 39 countries. She has also received numerous grants and awards to support her work, including an honorary doctorate from the University of Basel and the Diner Award for Outstanding Mid-Career Contributions in Personality Psychology. And tonight we're going to hear about her work. Is it possible to become happier? And if yes, how?
Thank you so much, Lonnie. Let me share my screen and I'll get started. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. Okay. So yeah, good evening. I'm delighted to speak today on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that is on how we all can become happier, which is possible at any age. And I personally believe it's even more possible as we become older. I should note, I don't do research on across the lifespan. Most of my work is on sort of young and sort of middle-aged adults and some kids too, some older adults too, but I think everything I do is relevant to all age groups. So research shows that older people are emotionally wiser. So we know better what makes us happy and what doesn't. We don't get stressed out as much by little things like we used to when we were younger. So everything I'm going to say today applies to us older people. I'm starting to include myself in that group. So today I'm going to talk about my research on happiness, which I started doing more than 30 years ago. And this work, I hope you'll find relevant to your own lives, as well as to your friends and families. This is the book, The How of Happiness, where much of the work is described. I'm going to show you my main collaborators and my fantastic lab at UC Riverside, and our building, which I really love and I missed during the pandemic. Okay, so I'm gonna start by taking a long step back to World War II, which we've all been kind of reminded of lately and alarmingly. So during the Second World War, aviation experts deployed like a lot of energies and resources to studying military planes that went down. And one day someone asked, why aren't we studying the planes that stay up in the air? And this is a really good metaphor, I think, for the work that my students and collaborators and I do in the field of what we call well-being science, happiness science. We study why happy people are happy, why healthy people are healthy, and why successful people are successful. So fortunately, a number of laboratories, including my own, have been toiling sort of hard to answer these questions. So today, I'm going to give you a flavor of the different kinds of experiments that we've done and try to understand how happiness can shift over time in both older and younger people. And I'm going to give you a conceptual theory, kind of a model that drives our research and gives you the big picture. And I believe that most of us want to be happy. We don't always sort of use the same language to describe that wish. We might define happiness differently and the ways to get there differently. But the desire for happiness, surveys by psychologists show, appears to be a universal goal, or I mean, I don't like to say universal, but sort of a near universal goal. I was actually born in Russia, where people talk about the importance of suffering. Suffering is important to build character and to gain salvation into the next life. But even in Russia, I did a study where I asked parents what they wanted most for their children, and they said, I want my children to be happy. So we had to just ask the question the right way. Okay, before I begin, I want to define happiness, also known as subjective well-being in the research, which is kind of like a jargon term for it. So I, along with many researchers, define happiness as consisting of two components. And the first component is the experience of fairly frequent positive emotions like joy, interest, pride, enthusiasm, affection, peacefulness. Of course, the experience of negative emotions at appropriate times is also critical to functioning. Sometimes, when you see injustice, you need to feel angry, right? When you have something important to prepare for, you need to feel anxious. Okay, so the first component is experiencing positive emotions. The second component is having a sense that your life is good, that you're achieving your life goals, you're progressing towards your life goals, sort of at a good pace. And I like to think of these two components, as being happy in your life and being happy with your life. You kind of need to be both happy in your life and with your life to be kind of a fully happy person. And I should also add that hundreds of studies have now shown that people who report being happy in their lives and being happy with their lives are more successful in a sense. They're healthier, they live longer, they're more creative and productive, they're better leaders and negotiators. Happier people have more social support, have better relationships, they're better able to bounce back from adversity, they're more resilient. So happiness is not just something that feels good. It's not just about pleasure. It has many benefits for ourselves and for our families and for our communities. And of course, the causal direction goes both ways, right? So being married, for example, makes people happy, but happier people are more likely to find marriage partners. Okay, so being happy leads people to accrue lots of good things in their lives. And just as an example, I want to tell you about a few of these studies on physical health, which is so important for all of us. So there are a lot of longitudinal studies in this area of health. And so basically what these studies do is they measure people's happiness at one point in time, and then they follow them to see who gets sick or sort of what kind of health outcomes they show. And so I'm going to show you a whole bunch of studies, and they all sort of each line I'm going to show you represents one or several different studies. So for example, people who are happy at one point in time have been shown to have a lower incidence of stroke 16 years later and lower incidence of heart disease, both coronary and ischemic heart disease, 10 and 15 years later. If you have heart disease and you're happier, you're more likely to survive it up to 11 years later. If you have lung cancer, you're more likely to survive it 3 years later, and you're less likely to be receiving be on disability up to 11 years later if you're happier. I want to just sort of very quickly note, some people think that we're kind of like blaming the victim by showing these data, kind of like if you're sick, it's your fault and you're not happy enough. And so I just wanted to kind of mention, caveat, that is not at all what these findings are implying. Obviously, health has lots of influences and determinants, and happiness is only one of them. This is an interesting one. Happier people are less likely to die in car accidents 8 years later. We could talk about that later if you're interested. Why? And they're less likely to die of all causes 50 years later. So basically, happier people are more sort of live longer. So why is happiness good for health? There are likely many reasons. So there's evidence that happy people, happy adults and kids, engage in better health behaviors. So they might eat better, exercise more, be more cautious while they're driving. And positive emotions, which are the hallmark of happiness, also appear to boost people's immune systems. And there's some data indicating that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so that's about sort of benefits of happiness for health. So I hope I've kind of convinced you that happiness is important. But when I tell people what I do, I'm often asked, is it even possible to become happier? And so I get this question so often that I titled my talk today after that question. Well, fortunately, tons of randomized controlled experiments, kind of like clinical trials, they're not technically clinical trials, or maybe they are, depending what standard you use, have now shown that people can become happier when they deliberately practice what I call positive activities. Okay, so what makes people happier? Lots and lots of things. There are probably 100 strategies we can use to become happier. So So activities like expressing gratitude, doing acts of kindness, acting extroverted, affirming your most important values. So I'm going to tell you about some of these studies today, but we're going to focus today on how and why doing kind, grateful, and social acts, so being more generous, being more grateful, and being more social makes people happier. So my lab and other labs have been testing the conditions under which these activities are most successful in making people happy. But I'm also interested in the conditions under which these so-called positive activities can backfire, might sometimes actually undermine happiness, make people less happy. So we can talk, if you're interested, we can talk about the dark side of the pursuit of happiness as well. So my laboratory conducts what we call positive activity interventions. And what we typically do in our studies is we instruct our research participants to practice a particular positive activity on a regular basis, like for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 10 weeks. And then we follow them across time to see whether that exercise makes them happier. And of course, we have various control groups and comparison groups. But I'm not interested in what activities work, but sort of how and why they work, sort of the how and why. So I'm going to give you the big picture, and bear with me for a minute. And remember, as Rachel said, it's important to learn new things. So I'm going to teach you how to read this figure. So this is the model, the theoretical framework that drives our research. And essentially it illustrates which factors, both features of the person, the happiness seeker. So here in the bottom right is features of the person, impact the effectiveness of a particular activity, and also which features of the activity itself impact its effectiveness to sort of make people happier. So this bottom part of the model, and I'm going to return to the model a few times during the talk. This is the how of the pursuit of happiness. Sort of how is it that when you express gratitude, it makes you happier. And on top here is the why part of the model. So like when you, here, let me show you. So for example, how and why is it that when people express gratitude, they become happier? So the why would be when you express gratitude, you feel more connected, or you have more good things happen to you, you become happier. The how is like, what makes it more or less effective? So like maybe your culture makes a difference, whether expressing gratitude makes you happy, which actually it does. So for example, I'm going to show you a few typical studies, like really simple studies. So in one of the first studies we've ever done, actually two of the studies I'm going to show you are really old studies because they're really cool. One of the two first studies we've ever done. So we did a study that was a 6-week intervention where we had volunteers count their blessings. Now I think everyone here knows what it means to count their blessings. So in this study, we basically had people write down up to 5 things for which they're grateful over the course of 6 weeks. Furthermore, we asked them either to do it once a week. So we randomly assign people into sort of different conditions. So either you do it every Sunday night, once a week, every Sunday night, you write down what you're grateful for, or you do it 3 times a week, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday night. Sorry, you write down what you're grateful for. The control group in this particular study only completed our measures and they didn't actually do anything. This is in almost all other studies, we have more active control groups. This one was just called a measurement only control group. Okay, so here's what we found. So I'm going to show you changes in gratitude and changes in happiness from before to after the 6-week intervention. So these are histograms. And so on the left, you see changes in gratitude, and you have sort of the control group, the once a week counting blessings group, or the 3 times a week counting blessings group. So you see here in both graphs, in terms of changes in gratitude, changes in happiness, you see that only those participants who counted their blessings once a week, the orange bars in the middle, only those participants became more grateful over the 6-week period, and they became happier over the 6-week period. The other people didn't. The people who counted the blessings 3 times a week didn't, and the control group didn't. So it's actually kind of interesting. We were not totally expecting that, but we think, and again, I'm interested to see what you guys think, but we think that counting your blessings, trying to express gratitude like 3 times a week, maybe it became a chore. It became kind of less fresh and meaningful over time. Sometimes I remember the first time I ever gave this talk, someone approached me and said, a lot of religious rituals, not all of them, but a lot happen like once a week. And so maybe there's something about like once a week reviewing your life that's special. And so, but I think that if you try to express gratitude too often, it could actually backfire because you might find it difficult to think of things to be grateful for. So we actually did a study more recently where we asked people to count like different numbers of blessings. So we had one condition where people counted 2 blessings, like just think of 2 things to be grateful for. We had another condition where people counted 4 blessings, or 8 blessings, or 16 blessings, or 32 blessings? So actually think, maybe we could do this in chat. What do you think was like the optimal number of blessings? Maybe put it in chat. Was it 2, 4, 8, 16, or 32? How many sort of things to be grateful for do you think was the optimal? Okay, let's see. So 2, 4, 8, 16, or 32? Okay, 2 or 4. Yeah, fewer is better. I thought it would be 4. The answer, yeah, actually almost everyone is saying like 2 or 4, 3. I thought it would be 4. It turns out, oh no, I lost my cursor. Where is it? Here it is. It turns out the answer is 8 blessings. I was a little surprised about that, but we're trying to replicate that study right now. So, but going back to this model that I showed you before, you see I have dosage circled. So basically, this study indicated to us that it's critical to pay attention to the timing or the dosage of a positive activity. So it's important to consider sort of what's the optimal kind of dosage of gratitude. Just like there's an optimal dosage of a vaccine or a drug, right? There's an optimal dosage of gratitude. Now I'm going to give you another example of a happiness intervention, where this time also reveals the importance of dosage, but this one happens to be about doing acts of kindness. So this study, we asked people to do acts of kindness, 5 acts of kindness a week for 6 weeks that you don't normally do, because we all do acts of kindness, every week. So these are sort of over and above what we usually do. And either we had people do it all in a single day, like on Monday, like what's today's Wednesday, so like tomorrow or Thursday, do 5 acts of kindness that you don't normally do, or you can kind of do them on different days, spread them across the week. And we had a control group. And by the way, this is actually kind of cool. I found out a couple of years ago that this study, or like the graph for it, was on the SAT test. So like students actually saw the graph of the study, and they like, that was sort of the right answer. So that was exciting. My old advisor from grad school once told me that, kind of silly, that you sort of, you've made it when you're the right answer on the SAT or the GRE test or whatever, MCAT, as opposed to like the filler or the distractor, right? Like, so you want to be the right answer. It's kind of funny. Okay, so here are the examples of the kinds of kind acts that people have done. We've since then done tons of studies where we ask people to do acts of kindness. So I feel like we've like spread a lot of like kindness in the world through our experiments. These are sort of examples of that kind acts. Some of them are small, some are big. Okay, so here's the results of the study. So again, this is a histogram showing changes in happiness from before to after the 6-week intervention. And you can see that only those people who did all their acts of kindness on a single day, the blue bar on the right, they became happier. Everyone else kind of stayed the same or became a little bit less happy. So we think there's something really powerful and impactful and salient when you kind of help all at once. Maybe if you spread your kindness over the course of the week, it's kind of just a chore or burden, and it doesn't really make you happy. So it's kind of like you want to swallow all your pills all at once, as opposed to spreading them out. Of course, don't do this with pills, but do it with kindness. Okay, so like the blessing study, this study revealed the importance of paying attention to dosage, to the right sort of amount of dosage when pursuing happiness. Okay, moving on. We did, here's another example of something to consider when you're trying to maximize the success of a happiness strategy, and that is whether the strategy is directing your attention on yourself or others. So in this study, we had 3 conditions. So actually just look at the 3 sort of, the labels for the 3 lines. This is a 4-week intervention, and we asked people either to do acts of kindness for other people over the course of 4 weeks. And we usually ask people to do 3 acts of kindness in one day, like every Monday, do 3 acts of kindness for others. That's the red line. But then we had the blue line. We asked people as a comparison condition, do acts of kindness for yourself. We actually thought that was a really great comparison condition because it's also positive, and self-care is important. And by the way, by acts of kindness for yourself, I don't mean self-compassion, but like self-indulgent acts, like take a nap, have a piece of chocolate, get a massage, do something sort of nice for yourself. And the control group was asked to sort of, quote, organize their time by keeping track of their weekly activities. So it was also kind of described as a positive strategy, but it wasn't really, it was just sort of a neutral activity. And so this graph shows changes in flourishing or happiness from sort of at baseline before the intervention started. Post-test is like right after the 4-week intervention. And then we had a 1-month follow-up, sort of a month later. And so you can see in this graph that only those people, and this is a big diverse sample, 473 people in the study, only those who did acts of kindness for other people, they became happier. You know, the red line goes up and it stays up even a month later. The people who did acts of kindness for themselves, I mean, it turns out, I mean, they did feel good in the moment, but they didn't actually feel good sort of at the end of the week or the end of the month. So this graph shows, so this study demonstrates that ironically, if you want to make yourself happier, you need to direct your attention to others. Sort of happiness increasing activities should be other oriented. If you look at here, this model again, other versus self-oriented, happiness increasing activities should be other oriented. And sort of as an aside, research shows that sort of a lot of like life's problems are due to people kind of directing too much attention on themselves, like being sort of too self-absorbed. And so this shows kind of when you direct your attention on something else, a hobby, your work, you know, learning how to paint, other people, you are happier. Okay, I want to tell you about another study that we did. This time it was done with over 500 working adults, where we asked people either to do acts of kindness, okay, just like in the other study for other people, or to do just to engage in more social interactions, because we thought, you know what, maybe acts of kindness makes people happy because most of them are social. Like you're kind of like going, like you're giving a coffee to your friend, you know, giving a little gift, or I don't know, helping them with their car or something. And so, so is it the social part of the pro-social interactions that matter, or is there something special about kindness? And I could talk about this some more, but basically in this study, we asked people over the course of 4 weeks to engage in 12 more pro-social or kind interaction they don't normally do, or to engage in more social interactions, just like chat with someone, talk to your barista, call your friend, you know, just social interactions. And this study was done in collaboration with a really cool company in San Francisco called Better Up. They actually were in the news recently because Prince Harry, of all people, joined their company as the chief impact officer. I guess they created that position for him. Okay, so in this study, we found there were 2 important factors to consider. When you think about like what is most sort of happiness inducing and what is most connecting. So we asked people, how connected did you feel when you like brought that coffee to your colleague, or when you chatted with the barista? Did you feel like in sync with them? Did you feel warmth? Did you feel a sense of mutual trust? So I'm going to show you sense of connection on the y-axis. And so what we found here is that the medium mattered. Sort of how people engage in their social or pro-social interaction mattered to the magnitude of connection that they felt. So it turned out basically that the sort of more voice and face-to-face contact there was, the more connection felt, and in turn, the more positive emotions people experienced. And so when people did their sort of social or kind interactions in person, or by video chat, or by phone, they felt more connected. By the way, this study was done in 2019. It was before the pandemic, before everyone was sort of voice chatting. And so social media was the least connecting. Okay, so basically we found that digital interactions were the least connecting. So the medium mattered, the more visual and voice contact, the more connected people felt and the happier they were. And I just wanted to add that sort of my lab has become very interested lately in the role that technology plays in the happiness of people, especially young people like teenagers and especially teen girls. There's evidence that we and others are finding that social media use especially is sort of harmful, maybe harmful to teen girls in particular, and smartphone use as well. So that's something that we're also studying. Okay, this study we also found, we have one other finding, which is that also mattered who the sort of target of your pro-social or social interactions were. So when the target was closer to you, if they were your partner or your friend, you felt more connected than if they were a stranger or acquaintance. By the way, there's lots of research showing that even like interacting with strangers, like strangers on a train or in a coffee shop, is also happiness inducing. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It's just that relative to sort of friends and family, we feel more connected, to friends and family. Okay, so the target mattered. The closer the target of kind or social acts, the more connected people felt and the happier they were. Okay, so now in recent years, we've become, I think this is actually the last study I'm going to tell you about. We've become more interested in whether positive activities can do a lot more than make people happy. Like all the studies I've shown you until now are really about happiness and connection, right? These are sort of when you express gratitude, when you do acts of kindness, you feel happy, you feel connected. But like, can doing these things also sort of make us, I don't know, more successful in life? Can sort of do more than make us happy? So for example, doing acts of kindness can have benefits beyond happiness. So I'm going to end by telling you about a really exciting study with an immunologist at UCLA, sort of an old friend from grad school. And in this study, we collected blood before and after a 4-week acts of kindness intervention. I'm going to show you sort of what we found. Okay, so in this study, we had 4 conditions. These were similar to another study I already presented, so they'll be familiar to you. So we asked people to do acts of kindness for others. This is across 4 weeks, 3 acts of kindness for others a week that you don't normally do. Then we had a self condition. So do acts of kindness for yourself over the course of 4 weeks. We also had this one I hadn't shown you before. We also had a world condition. So do acts of kindness for the world, like do something nice for the environment, like pick up litter. And then the control was keeping track of daily activities, this sort of organizational activity. So we had these 4 conditions. People were randomly assigned in one of these 4 groups. This is an experiment. We collect blood before and after, and then I send them off to assay because I am not a biologist. And this is what we found. So we found that doing acts of kindness for other people versus doing something self-indulgent for yourself, which is actually a very strong comparison, led to changes in RNA gene expression. These are, this decrease here represents downregulation of pro-inflammatory genes, or sort of less pro-inflammatory gene expression. But only you see that in the condition where people did acts of kindness for other people. So it's really exciting. And the data are really cool, but it's just one study. So we've been trying to replicate this study in 2 other samples. And I'm excited to report that we just recently resubmitted a paper where we replicated these results in a completely new sample. This time we found that doing acts of kindness for others, when people actually comply and they actually do it, led to both less pro-inflammatory gene expression. So again, remember, more inflammation is bad, right? So less pro-inflammatory gene expression is good. We also found greater antiviral gene expression. So antiviral, right, fighting viruses is good. It's too early to say, but the suggestion is if you want to ward off viruses, you should support and help other people in your community. But I mean, I won't actually say that. It's too early, but it would be kind of fun if that were definitely true. Okay, so I'm going to conclude my talk on what might sound like a cliche. But as you can see, hopefully, my students and I have landed on this cliche after a lot of research. So basically what we find is that if you want to be happier and if you want to experience the benefits of happiness, I already showed you the benefits for better health, but also happier people have better relationships, they're more creative, both during sort of fraught and taxing times, like a war, like a pandemic that we were living through right now, and during the normal sort of ups and downs of life. Research suggests that you should focus not on yourself, but on others, both on supporting other people and also recognizing the ways in which they have supported you via gratitude. Okay, thank you very much. I love the question and answer part.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and also to Rachel. If you both want to reappear, I will start going through. We've got some wonderful questions from our attendees. So I will read the question. The first few came through for Rachel, so we can go through those first. An anonymous attendee asked whether do older adults need to learn differently than children due to changes in their brain or from age?
That's a really great question. So yes and no, right? So my approach is, let's see what we can take from how infants and children learn, because they have a lot of help from the environment, a lot of encouraging people around them, things like that. So there are a lot of things that we can take from that kind of approach. But there are also things that we do not want, like we don't want somebody talking to us like, you can do it. That's how we talk to our baby. That's not how we want to be talked to as adults. And so there's definitely some things we don't want to adopt. And then there's some things that we do want to adopt. So, but I'm also working on some research on how, as adults, we might actually be better learners in some ways than babies and kids, because like as an adult, I don't need to learn that there are things called words when I'm learning a second language, right? I have like foundational knowledge for some things, but then you can apply to other things. So there definitely kind of costs and benefits of learning as a child or as an adult, and we can take the benefits, from children and benefits from adults and combine those.
Great. I'll ask another question to Rachel, and then I'll actually squeeze some in for Sonia, because I want to make sure we get to some of them. We I think we can stick around till about 7:10 or 7:15. So we'll try and get through as many of these as we can. Okay, Rachel, another question that we had was asking about the difference in data gathered at baseline and 0 week. And I think related to this is the difference between baseline and pre-test.
Yeah, so, and then there was a related one why there might have been an increase for the control group too. So I can answer kind of all three at the same time. So there was a very slight increase for the control group and also at the pre-week 0 and week 0. So nothing to do with the intervention, just if you did the test twice, then, you know, you get used to the test. You don't know the answers, but you get used to the environment and things like that. And factors like that will help you increase your score a little bit, but not to the extent that like you would be suddenly similar to younger adults, for example.
Great, thank you. Sonia, a question that came through from Kevin Kingma asked, how do you distinguish happiness from irrational exuberance or delusional happiness?
I was just reading that, Lonnie. I was thinking, oh, I hope you don't ask me that question. That's a really great question. Oh my God. So I guess it depends what you mean by that. You know, most people, you know whether they're happy. And I think what the person means, what Kevin means is that, is it Kevin? Is that like, if you live in a really like under really poor conditions, and you're still like really happy, like, does that mean that you're kind of irrationally happy? Like you're delusionally happy? Like if that's the question, then that's a really subjective judgment, like almost a philosophical question. Like, can you be happy when you're like a refugee from Ukraine? Now, I would say yes. I think some people can be happy under almost any circumstances, at least temporarily. Doesn't mean that you're being delusional or irrational. I guess what's irrational or delusional is when you assess like risks and you say, oh yeah, like I could just cross the freeway and I won't get hurt. So that could be seen as irrational. But but I'm not sure if I consider sort of happiness as something that can be irrational or delusional. So it's a really, really hard and like complicated question. I'm not really sure what to say, but I will say that our life circumstances do influence how happy we are. Of course, like it's really hard to be happy when you're living in poverty, or if you're in an abusive relationship, or if you have a lot of uncertainty, you know, if you're in a war zone. But that influence is not, it's not like 100% influence. You know, our conditions don't influence us as much as we think they do. And so there's sort of everyone's across the spectrum. The research basically suggests that sort of, you know, happiness is more about like how you feel. I mean, this is a cliche, like how you feel inside as opposed to the outside, but the outside conditions do matter. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. Maybe we could go into another question and then come back to it if we have time.
Sure. Yeah. There's another question here actually from Jasmine Lobbins asking about the difference between self-indulgent and self-compassionate activities.
Great question, because I kind of like glossed over that really fast. So self-compassion is a construct in psychology that has a specific meaning. And basically what it means when you're when you're showing self-compassion to yourself, it's like when you're like, let's say you fail at something or something goes badly, showing self-compassion is kind of like talking to yourself like a kind friend might talk to us. You know, like the classic example is like, you go on a date and it doesn't go well and you say, oh, I must be boring or I must be unattractive. Like your kind friend wouldn't pretty much never tell you that. And so self-compassion is kind of, again, like thinking about yourself the way that a kind friend would. And when I was talking about self-indulgent activities, they really weren't about sort of showing yourself kind of kindness in terms of like interpreting your behaviors. It was more like just doing things, as I mentioned, like getting a massage, you know, doing sort of fun things that, you know, make you feel good in the moment, which are still is good. I mean, by the way, positive emotions in the moment are really important because they have consequences, right? So even if you're happy for 5 minutes, I mean, unless they're dangerous or, you know, harmful, like if you eat too much chocolate, that's bad. But, you know, a piece of chocolate makes you happy for 5 minutes. You know, research shows that might boost your immune system a little bit. That might make you have a creative thought. You know, that might make you smile and someone is more likely to approach you. And so that kind of reinforces your happiness. So anyway, self-indulgent acts kind of make you feel happy in the moment as opposed to sort of self-compassionate. behavior, which is sort of about how you talk to yourself about your failures and weaknesses.
Great, thank you. Rachel, here's another one for you from Kevin Kingma. Are you able to screen the treatment groups to make sure they are functionally similar before treatment? So for example, that both treatment and control groups have the same vision.
So we try to equate them as much as possible. So first, they can't do our study unless they have normal or corrected to normal vision and things like that. But and they, you know, have no diagnoses for dementia or anything like that. So the inclusion criteria are the same for both groups. But the beyond that, we, you know, I guess what we end up doing is we randomly assign them to the conditions so that they, if there are any differences, they're, you know, equally likely to be in one or the other condition. So you can't, I guess you can't control for everything. So, you know, we have people of different ages and different backgrounds and stuff like that. So we try to equate as much as we can, and then we randomize them to try to, you know, deal with the rest.
Great. This one's for Sonia from Gustavo Wong. Could you elaborate on what makes people happier when coming up with 8 versus 3 or 4 gratitude thoughts? It seems to me that coming up with 8 becomes tedious.
Yeah, I agree with Gustavo. That's why I was surprised that sort of coming up with 8 things to be grateful for was associated with sort of the biggest happiness boost in that study that I mentioned. I think it does seem tedious, doesn't it? I think in that study, people came up with kind of like little things. So it wasn't like the 8 items were like pretty easy to come up with. And we also only did it once. I should have mentioned, we also only did this once. I think if we did it, maybe this sort of implied that it was more than once. If we did it once a week, like coming up with 8 things to be grateful for once a week or every day, can really become tedious. But sort of doing it once, people kind of like really, you know, were able to think of 8 things. There's other studies that have done it differently, where they had people sort of elaborate on what they're grateful for. We actually, one of my students did her master's thesis on comparing lists versus like narrative. So you sort of write a list of what you're grateful for, as opposed to you write about it, like why you're grateful. Like, I'm grateful for my mom because she does this for me, et cetera, et cetera. And we found like actually pretty strong effect that sort of narrative ways of expressing gratitude was much more impactful than like lists.
I actually really like this next question from Kareem Zahedi. They ask, if someone does an act of kindness for you, does that have an impact on your happiness?
So it does. I mean, I guess that seems, obvious that, yeah, like if someone helps us, that it would. But what's really cool is to compare. So we actually did a study a long time ago. One of my grad students from UCR flew to Spain, to Madrid, because we had a collaboration with Coca-Cola, and they have offices everywhere. So they allowed us to do this research in their offices in Madrid. And we did kind of like a secret Santa study there. So we basically randomly assigned some of employees of that office to like get a list of people who are their colleagues. So imagine if we all do this, like you get a list of like 8 colleagues, or and you have to do acts of kindness for those colleagues. And we made sure to have like, I think it was like 8 or maybe even longer, because we want to make sure that like you sort of knew them a little bit, because it'd be weird, right, to like do acts of kindness for people you don't really know, or you might be seen like you're stalking them or something. So we had people who sort of randomly assigned to do these acts of kindness, and then we had people who were on these lists who were the recipients of the acts of kindness, but they didn't know that they were on the list. So suddenly like people started doing good, nice things for them. And then we also had like observers or witnesses. And so we were able to compare the effects on happiness on the givers versus the receivers. And guess what we found? In the moment, like right after the acts of kindness, the receivers actually were about similar, but maybe were a little happier, right? So it's like, they were like, great, people are doing nice things for me. But if you look across like the weeks, what endured, the happiness that endured was the happiness by the givers, not by the receivers.
That's wonderful. Our last question tonight is from an anonymous attendee. Have you looked at level stress versus level of happiness? Like, can someone be super stressed but also happy?
We do measure anxiety, and yeah, we sometimes measure stress. We do find the answer is yes. Those constructs are correlated or inversely correlated. So happiness is generally like the higher the happiness, the less the stress, or more stress, less happiness. But it's not a perfect correlation. So that means you can always find people who are kind of at all the different, up and down. And actually, one way to think about it is like in terms of like different quadrants. Actually, I'll just end by saying we had this one paper on self-esteem and happiness. And so because people are asking you, can you be like happy when you have low self-esteem, or can you be unhappy when you have high self-esteem? And what we found was they're like sort of like these 4 quadrants. There are lots of people who are happy and have high self-esteem. There are lots of people who are unhappy and have low self-esteem. There are also quite a few people who have high self-esteem but are unhappy. And I think of some academics in that category. But basically, we found almost no one who had low self-esteem but was happy. So sometimes you have these kind of like asymmetric results. So that's just an example from that. But I think it's really kind of interesting and informative to do those types of analyses. So thank you for that question.
And I want to thank both of you for your wonderful presentations tonight. I also want to thank the audience for listening, for joining us tonight, for asking such wonderful questions. And I hope that you join us on April 27th, where we will have the 3rd session of our series, and we'll be examining the role of genetics, life experience, and chronic inflammation on brain aging. Thanks, everyone.